This morning what we want to talk about is just a few ideas about a simple faith. Simple. You know, we as human beings, we tend to take things that are in their very essence simple, and we make them so hard, so complicated, that they're barely sensible. Dr. Holmes tells us that we have made a riddle out of simplicity itself. And I believe that part of the reason that we do this, part of our human culture, is that anything that is to be valuable must be difficult. It's just the way that that the human psyche works. You know, why is gold valuable? Well, it's rare and it's hard to get to, and you have to prospect for it, and you have to mine it, and you have to smelt it. You know, and why do our athletes, our professional athletes, get paid millions of dollars to play a sport? Well, because the level at which they play that sport, it is so difficult that only a few people can do that. So we tend to celebrate in our culture that which is difficult. On a Sunday afternoon, people go out, and by the tens of thousands, they fill the sports stadium, and by the millions, they turn on the TV sets, and they are celebrating that which is difficult. And life doesn't need to be difficult. Faith does not need to be difficult. We are the ones who make it so. We are the ones as human beings who create theologies that are difficult to understand. We create hundreds and hundreds of rules and regulations by which people are supposed to live, things that they ought to do, things that they ought not to do. We take the simplest little lines from Scripture and write volumes of books about what it means, or what it ought to mean, or what it should mean. And we have convinced ourselves that because knowing God, or relationship with God, our unity with the divine, is an extremely valuable thing. It's the most valuable thing that we will ever have in our lives. I believe we have made it difficult. We have made it difficult so we can show how valuable it is. We believe that only people who are willing to go off and live in a monastery or sit in a cave by themselves for many, many years in deep contemplation, in prayer and in study, meditation, that these are the ones who get to experience the presence of God. These are the exceptions to the rule. These are the saints, if you will. I remember as a small boy growing up, and we would study the lives of the saints and how they withdrew themselves from society and how they dedicated themselves to their spiritual growth. And they were put forward as examples, but they were put forward more as an example of the exception. This was something for us to know about, but not something necessarily for us to aspire to, because after all, you know, we were in a different place in life, and we didn't have the time or the talent in some cases, we were told, to dedicate ourselves to that monastic life. But life is so simple. You know, the things that are most important, the things that matter the absolute most to us, we do without ever questioning, without ever thinking. When a child comes into this world, the first thing it does is it opens its mouth. Its little lungs expand because they were compressed coming down the birth canal. And it takes its first breath. It doesn't think about it. It doesn't ask about it. It doesn't study about it. It doesn't stop and turn around and say to people, now, how do I do this? There is a wisdom, a knowing within that child that has already instructed it what to do. What to do. in order to do that which is most important for its physical life, to take its first breath. You take a child that is just born and you hand it to its mother and she puts it to her breast. It begins to nurse. Who taught it how to do that? Where did it study? Where did it learn? There are things that we know that no one could teach us. There are things that we know that are so important to our growth and to our life. And yet we never had to study them. They came to us easily. They came to us simply. They came to us because that which has created us out of itself, that which has prepared the very life that we lead out of itself, prepared us with all that we need. All that we need is already here. All that we need is very simple. If we would simply surrender to it, if we would simply get rid of the notion that this has to be hard, get rid of the notion that, oh yes, I would really love to experience the presence of God, but that's going to take a long time in a dark place with very little food and very little drink. Dr. Holmes tells us, that we choose this life. We choose the way that we will live life. And we can make our spiritual growth a struggle, or we can make it a song to be sung. And I love that idea, Is your life a song to be sung? Are you going through this world singing and enjoying and experiencing and celebrating that love and that presence wherever you find it? The simplest person can take a seed, as we talked last week, and put it in the ground, and it'll grow. It doesn't have to be difficult. The simplest heart can turn to that which it intuitively knows is within. The love and the presence of that which has created us. And the simplest faith can commune with it. We're given an example in the New Testament, and keep in mind, that these stories that are there for a teaching purpose. Of all of the things that were ever written, of all of the things that people discarded and said, no, we're not going to include that. Of all of the things that could have been, the things that are definitely there for a reason. Now they may be there for a reason that helps us, or they may be there for other reasons, for political reasons, but they're there for a reason. Remember that. They're there for a reason. And we're given this story of Jesus, who, remember, became the Christ, and the Christ is the presence of God within us, the presence of God with us. So the character Jesus, the person Jesus, represents the Christ, one in whom the presence of God is visible, is known. And the story tells us that the children wanted to go to be with the Christ. And the adults were keeping them away. The adult consciousness, the consciousness that makes things hard, was trying to keep them away. And the instruction that we're given is, let them come unto me. Because unless you come to me, the Christ, the awareness of the presence of God within man, unless you come to me as a child, you cannot enter the kingdom. And what is the kingdom but the very experience of the presence of God? That is the kingdom. And that was the message that Jesus taught about how to find the kingdom, how to be in the kingdom. All of the rules and regulations and dogma and creed and sermons and all of those things came way after. as people took this very simple message, be still, go within as a child, seek and ye shall find. After that, human beings got a hold of it and made it more difficult than it needs to be. So how does a child come? How does a child go about its business? You know, that there are teachers. It's like the world is almost upside down in some cases. The little ones come into the world and they want to be grown up and they want to be adults. And we want to teach them how to be adults, and we want to teach them the right way to live, and we want to teach them all that we know. And what we're teaching them is the ways of the world. And yet they come in knowing the ways of the heart. There's an innocence and a simplicity and a trust about the child. And as they grow and as they learn about the world, that innocence and that simplicity and that trust is diminished, right? Because they learn, literally the story of the garden, they learn about the knowledge of good and the knowledge of evil. But when a child believes, and they believe with every fiber of their being. They believe, and they don't question their belief, you know. And it's sometimes it's completely unflappable and unshakable. Even when presented with evidence to the contrary, the child will just not believe it. They catch Daddy wearing a Santa Claus costume. They still believe in Santa Claus. Somehow Daddy was just pretending. There is something so sweet about that belief that can't be shaken, and that's what we're talking about today in the simple faith. A simple faith. You see, life is a matter of what we believe, and what we believe to a degree of faith. That is what life is all about. Dr. Holmes tells us that once we understand that it is literally being done unto us according to our belief, then it would seem reasonable that the most important task, if you want to call it that, in our life is to change our beliefs, to stop believing in the things that we don't want and start believing in the things that we do want. And if you have the textbook, please read the chapter on faith sometime during the week. If you have the little book, Living the Science of Mind, there's an excellent little essay in there on prayer, faith, and belief. And kind of take his ideas and take them deeper than what we can go into in a few minutes together on a Sunday morning. What he tells us is that the universe is a spiritual universe. It is a universe that we discover through our mentality, through our minds. We become aware, we become conscious, we think, we analyze, we weigh, we discover. But what we discover through our intellect. And of course, what we discover through the intellect tells us that the intellect only goes so far, that there is something beyond the intellect. There is that from which the thoughts come, but which is beyond thoughts, that from which words come, but which is beyond words. But the intellect makes us aware. We become aware. So we become aware of who we are, of what the world is, of what God is. We become aware of those things first, if you will, through our intellect, through analyzing, through weighing, through forming opinions, through forming beliefs. And every opinion that we hold is a belief. And every time we state our opinion or act out of our opinion, we are affirming our belief. And we tend to think of affirmations as being something positive because that's the way that we use the spiritual practice of affirmations. But we have to realize that our entire life is an affirmation of what we believe. We are constantly speaking and acting out of our belief. And we may be affirming that which is positive or that which is negative. We are affirming that which we believe, that which we have learned, that which we have grown up with. And everything that we have learned and everything that we have been taught and everything that we have grown up with is not necessarily positive, is not necessarily even true. It may merely be an opinion, a prejudice, a bias, a bigotry. And it may very well be something that it's time for us to let go of, because that belief is in fact directing our life experience. We truly get it, that it is done unto us according to our belief. Then we'd have to agree that understanding what we believe, and when appropriate, changing what we believe, is the secret, the key to all life. It is simplicity itself. We don't need volumes and volumes and volumes of dogma and creed. We don't need hundreds and thousands of rules and regulations. We don't need to study it for years and years and years and go live in a cave somewhere. What we need is a simple faith. A simple, childlike, total, with every fiber of my being, faith. That there's a power in the universe, which we call God, that knows us, that loves us, that guides us, that supports us. And it has provided for us a part of itself that functions as an immutable law that responds to us according to our belief. This is the secret of the answer or the non-answer of prayers. It is done unto you according to your belief. We can't imagine that God is sitting there in heaven listening to prayers and answering some and not answering others, or answering some partially and answering some others completely. There's something else going on, and what Holmes tells us is the answer to the prayer is in the one praying. It is in our belief. It is in our simple faith. So the first thing we want to understand is that there is a difference between belief and faith. And belief can just be an opinion. Well, I believe the such and such party is the best party to govern our country, or I believe that they ought to pass a law to do this, or I believe that, or I believe this. And when we use believe in that manner, we are kind of leaving the door open for another opinion. So I believe one party is the right party, but I understand and respect the fact that you may believe that the other party is a better party. So belief is kind of, well, that's the way I think, or that's the way I'm leaning. Excuse me. But there's other possibilities. There's other ways of looking at this, and I can understand that. I can accept that. I can tolerate that. I can appreciate it. But when it comes to a matter of faith, faith, as Dr. Holmes tells us, is a knowing so certain, that the opposite cannot possibly arise. Faith is taking that belief beyond an opinion where there's room in your mind for it another way. Faith is when that belief has become so absolutely certain that there's no other way. There's no other possibility. It never even enters your mind. So you would probably think it's silly if I asked you if you had faith in gravity. You would say, well, gravity is not something that you have to believe in or have faith in. Gravity is something that is. When you get out of bed in the morning and you stand up, gravity holds you firmly to the floor. When the apple falls from the tree, gravity pulls it firmly to the earth. It's not a matter of belief. It's not a matter of faith. It is. And really what you would be saying is, I am so absolutely certain that this is the way that it is, so let's stop talking of it in terms of faith. Let's stop talking of it in terms of belief. Let's start talking of it in terms of a fact. It is. It just absolutely is. So don't waste our time talking about faith and gravity. And my point is that your opinion about gravity is a knowing so certain that the opposite cannot be entertained. If I said to you, well, how do you know the apple always falls to the ground? You're not out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're not constantly observing. Maybe when you're asleep, some of the apples come off the tree and they float up to the sky. It could happen. You don't know. And you would say, no, I know. I know that the apple always falls to the tree. It has to fall from the tree to the ground. It has to. It must. There's no such thing as apples floating through the air. You see, I understand there's a mathematical equation that explains to me how gravity works. It's a law of attraction that's based upon mass and distance. And I understand it. And I know it's why we have a high tide and a low tide. And I know it's why the moon stays in orbit. I know. So don't talk to me about apples floating from trees. It's just nonsense. And that is the faith of knowing so certain that it is done, that the opposite cannot be entertained. Now this is extremely important when it comes to matters of growth in our life. There's many examples again in the New Testament of healings where we're told that it is the prayer of faith that heals. And there's also an example where the disciples went and tried to do a healing and they could not. And Jesus came along and did. And the disciples said to him, well, why is it that we couldn't have a healing in this case and you did? And Jesus said, well, this case requires prayer and fasting. Prayer and fasting. And we have to ask ourselves, well, what does it mean by prayer? And what does he mean by fasting? And the fasting, as we're talking about here, is not a physical fasting. It is not going without food or drink. It is keeping our mind away from any possibility to the opposite. No doubt. Having no doubt. So when I ask you if apples always fall from the tree, you are fasting from any ideas that they float off in the air. No, they don't float off in the air. Don't even talk to me about that. It's not even possible. And when we are engaging in our prayers of faith, the level of faith that we strive for, now keep in mind we don't start there, but the level of faith that we try to develop and we try to strive for is that faith that is also fasting. That knowing so certain that it is done, that we have removed ourselves from any ideas to the opposite. As Emma Curtis Hopkins would say, there's no mixture, there's no dilution, there's no evil in my idea of good, there is no sickness in my idea of health, there is no weakness in my idea of strength. God is omnipotence. God is omniscience. There's no ignorance. And God is omnipresence, everywhere present. See, what Emma tells us is that we believe in lack. We believe in lack, and because we believe in lack, we demonstrate lack. We believe that God is everywhere present, but maybe not right here in this situation. We believe that God always knows what to do, except maybe in this case he doesn't, or she doesn't, or it doesn't. We believe that God is powerful enough to do whatever God makes up its mind to do, but maybe this particular case is too strong for God to overcome. And those are ideas of lack or limitation. And what she is telling us is we have sullied up our faith. We have sullied up our ideas of omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence with ideas of lack, of limitation, and of separation. And we must fast. We must fast and abstain from those ideas of lack, of limitation, of separation, and we must arrive at the place of faith. We must strive to arrive at the place of faith, where nothing to the opposite can enter our consciousness. Now the good news is we don't have to completely arrive at that place in order for the demonstration to be made. If we did, we would probably not have very many demonstrations or answered prayers. But as long as our belief in good, as long as our faith in good is more powerful than our faith in evil, as long as our belief in health is more powerful than our belief in sickness, we will tend to demonstrate more health than sickness. But as we progress and as we move along in our faith, and our faith becomes simpler and simpler and simpler, and we fast from the ideas of lack and limitation, then the answer appears more fully. The demonstration appears more fully. This is what Dr. Holmes is talking about when he says sometimes it seems like a prayer is partially answered because we have a partial faith. We want a simple faith. So then the question becomes, if this business of faith and a belief is so all important, can we develop it? And the answer, thankfully, is yes, because if the answer was no, then there would be nothing to do. There would be no sense worrying about anything. There would be nothing to do because we couldn't do anything about it. We would come into this world with a certain amount of faith, and we would leave this world with a certain amount of faith. And there would be no way of growing spiritually. But that's not the case, and we're told that over and over again. I love the example of leaven, of yeast, and we're told that the kingdom of heaven is like yeast. You put a little bit of it in 60 pounds of dough, and you knead it all together, and after a while, the yeast has spread its way through that entire 60 pounds of dough. We're told that faith is like a mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds. If we just had the faith of a mustard seed, we could tell the mountain to get up and go, and it would. And we take that mustard seed and we put it in the ground, it becomes the greatest of the bushes. It becomes huge. And the birds of the air come and make their nests in its branches. These are divine ideas that are coming in. So our faith can grow like the mustard seed, like the yeast, like the leaven. It can grow. Now, it's obvious that if you just take dough and you make dough and you put it out, that natural airborne yeast will find it. But it happens a lot quicker if you deliberately infuse the yeast in there. And what I mean by that is your spiritual growth will occur more rapidly if you deliberately engage in the spiritual practices we talked about last week. And you open your soul up to the possibility. This is your education, right? This is your reading, exposing yourself to new and different ideas that help you to shake up and challenge your old beliefs so that you can ask yourself, what do I believe and why do I believe it? And why is this so? What evidence do I have to support that? Can I see it in operation? We do our treatment, our spiritual practice, which is for the purpose of producing a deeper degree of faith within us. We do our affirmations again to go in and shake up the old and limiting beliefs and create the opportunity for the new faith to make itself known. And in this chapter, Dr. Holmes talks about prayer. And I find it very interesting because we most often associate his teachings with the word treatment. And here he uses the word prayer. And he uses it in a way that is I would say more like meditation. But he talks about prayer not as a begging, not as a pleading, not as a beseeching, but as a communion with the soul, with a little s, our soul, with the oversoul, with the experience of the presence of God within us. And what he tells us is that when we turn in prayer, and this is exactly what we're told in the New Testament, to go within, to go to your prayer closet within, to go to your secret place within, to seek first the kingdom within, to go within, to be still and to know. And what Dr. Holmes tells us is that when we turn and we go within and we find that place and we find that presence and we find that experience of God, and we simply be with it, whether it be sitting in our chair, whether it be strolling on the beach, whether it be sitting in a park. But when we find that presence and we surrender to it, that it has a way of bubbling through our consciousness and washing away the old limiting ideas that don't need to be there any longer, and increasing our faith in it because of our experience of it. See, this is the faith of a little child. This is the simple faith. Other people wanted to make rules and regulations about how we should approach the Christ, whether we could, or whether we should, or whether we were worthy. And the children just said, let me be. Let me come and be with you. Let me sit on your lap. Let me experience your love. So what we're talking about today is our willingness along the way on our path of spiritual growth, our willingness along the way to let go of the ceremonies, to let go of the creeds, to let go of the dogma, to let go of the ritual. To recognize that the intellect can point us to that which is beyond the intellect, but it is simple faith that will take us the rest of the way. It is our desire to know God and to be with God. It is as the Eastern scriptures tell us, to seek God as earnestly as we would seek a pond if our hair was on fire. Do we want to know God and nothing else? Do we want to experience God and nothing else? Do we want to be as a small child and to surrender and to allow the burden of the ignorance that we have accumulated over our lifetime to fall away and to simply be in the presence, to be in the love? We continue to do our spiritual practice. We continue to do our education. We continue to do our treatment. We continue to do our affirmation. And every time we see a demonstration and answered prayer in our own life or in the life of someone we know, we recognize that there's a power that is responding, and that helps us to grow. But we also take time to simply experience, to go within as a small child with a simple faith, and to allow the love of God to instruct us. Dr. Holmes tells us there comes a time in our growth where no one can instruct us but that very presence itself, that no one can teach us but that very presence itself. Just as it taught us how to take our first breath, just as it taught us how to nurse, just as it knows how to digest the food that we eat and the water we drink. It knows how to lead us to itself. So I invite you this week, as often as you can, to go within, to go into the solitude of your secret place, the secret place of the Most High. To go within to find that which is waiting in quiet repose. Crawl up on its lap as if you were a child. Place your ear against its breast and hear the divine heartbeat. Bring yourself into a place of experiencing that love, that unconditional, accepting love, of knowing that you are safe and secure, of knowing that you are cared for, that you are healed, that you are provided for, and knowing that for that purpose you have come. Let the love and the intelligence that has created you out of itself, that has placed within you that unstoppable desire to find it, let it lead you this week. Let it guide you this week. Let it guard you this week. Let this week be your experiment in a simple faith. And so it is.